Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video, we're going to continue the Song of the Lioness Quartet. So we're going to be looking at the Hand of the Goddess. These are obviously by Tamora Pierce. I've already covered the first book. So this is an interesting book. So in the course of this book, Elena goes from about 16 to 18. So a couple things happen. One, her father's dead. So she starts off coming home or coming back to Chorus after kind of setting Coram up to kind of run things in her stead. Obviously, her brother's off learning to be a sorcerer, so Throm's over there. And yes, for some reason, whether it's pronounced Tom or not, I've always, in my head, I say Throm because it's spelled T-H-O-M. So to me, I say Throm. And yes, I know how Tom is spelled, but it's still, for some reason, I say Throm. So if it's different, I'll go back and forth. But yeah, again, it's spelled T-H-O-M. Is how it's spelled in the books. So they're busy. So she comes home, and on her way home, she finds a kitten with purple eyes. Obviously, this kitten belongs to the goddess because goddess shows up, gives her, it's like one of the coals from her fire into basically a coal-shaped gem that she hangs around her neck. It allows her to see magic. And she has this throughout the rest of the book series. And strangely enough, into the next. I think she has this for the rest of her life. So, and basically, as they said, the hand of the goddess. The goddess has chosen her to be her vessel. So, the gods are using her. So she goes home. She's back into Chorus. She starts wanting, kind of the beginning of this is she starts wanting to be more girly. She's about to turn 17. Jonathan is driving her crazy because he expects her to be dressed and basically go to all the functions, even though he knows she doesn't like it because she doesn't want to dance with ladies. She's female, and he knows this. And then he gets mad at her when she does. So, yeah, he's running hot and cold with her and driving her nuts. So she goes to talk to Eleni Cooper, George's mother, and says, I need to learn how to be a girl. Basically, because she's like, when I reveal myself and I take my ordeal of knighthood in close to a year, I'm going to reveal myself as a girl. So Eleni starts giving her lessons in being a girl. Now, she doesn't quite ever get the walk right because she's used to walking like a boy. But she starts wearing dresses. Jonathan and George also both find out about this because Jonathan's come down to town. And George obviously comes to see his mother. So they catch her getting fittings for dresses. And both of them think it's interesting. Jonathan really thinks it's interesting. And what ends up happening is, on her 17th birthday, she sees him flirting with Lady Delia. She comes up later. She's trying to hook Jonathan. But Jonathan's interested in Elena. So Elena sees him with Delia. She decides to leave because she knows Jonathan's sleeping with other people. Again, he's about probably 19 at this point, 19, 20. So she decides to put on one of her dresses and walk in the gardens. I think she puts a cloak on to hide herself, specifically to hide her red hair. In the town, she wears a black wig, because again, she's copper-haired with purple eyes. Kind of stands out. So, Jonathan comes to her, and he kisses her, and they kind of make out, and she's like, we can't do this. And he's kind of irritated with her. He goes back up to his rooms. She goes back up to their rooms. Their rooms are connected, because again, she's his squire. And she starts crying, and she's afraid. And she eventually goes in and tells Jonathan, and they have sex. This is pretty much implied. It's not mentioned, it's not described, they don't say anything about it. It's very much she goes to him and he kisses her, and she tells him she's afraid, and he says, that's okay, I'll help you. And that's pretty much the extent of it. So that starts happening. The next thing that happens is the country of Toussaint, I believe is how she pronounces it. Look at the maps here. I always love that. Yeah, it's Toussaint, which is east of them. Basically, you have the king. He doesn't really want to rule. His brothers are kind of doing it for him, and one of them's kind of power hungry and land hungry. So they're essentially mustering troops. Elena finds this out through George, who has spies everywhere. She reports it to Miles. Miles reports it to who needs to hear about it, just because he's kind of a bit of a spy master at this point. Even now, he becomes more of one later. So they get their people together, they go and they're waging war. Now, Sir Gareth, who's the king's champion to the current king, Jonathan's father, is injured. Essentially, somebody puts a burr underneath his horse's sandal and he's thrown. And Roger is put in charge. Now we know Roger, bad guy, the prince's cousin. He wants to take over. They very much implied that Roger sent the sleeping sickness to sicken the royal family. So because he was away in Carfax, so he basically plausible deniability. But again, Roger's in charge. He doesn't want Jonathan to do anything. Elena's eventually kidnapped. And while she's able to get the two sanctuaries away to escape, because she distracts them by getting herself beaten the crap out of by the king of this country's brother, who's waging war, and his other brother, who was basically spying on them, pretending to be one of the Tortall's troops. So, however, Jonathan, despite Roger's orders, goes to Miles. Miles says, "I'm going to go off over here. I don't know what the heck you're doing." And he goes along with his friends Gary and Raoul, and I think a few other people, a few of the squires who were very much friends with Elena, go and rescue her, and they end up kidnapping the two brothers and take them hostage. And his father, of course, the king, is pissed off. But what the heck is he going to do? As Miles, of course, had pointed out, he's not going to execute his son. Just not something you do. He doesn't have another heir, so he's not going to execute his son. He's just kind of pissed off. But they ransom these two men back to their brother, because he wants them to run his country for them. So he'll pretty much do anything. It's like, go away. And so that happens. But again, Elena's starting to suspect Roger more and more. So finally, you get to the ordeal of knighthood. So part of this is they have to be instructed by two other knights. So Elena eventually has to tell Gary, which is Sir Gareth the Younger, one of her friends. She reveals she's female. He's okay with it. He's like, well, we've never seen you bathe. We've never seen you swim. So interesting. And you worked really, really hard. Okay. Because you're short. That's the other thing about Elena. She's short. She's very, very short. She's very short and stocky. So she's not a tall person. So they are part of, she has to do the ritual bathing, which is the reason she has to tell Gary, and the vigil in the Temple of Ordeal before she goes into the temple, which essentially at one point in time it forces her to accept death. That's what I think it does. It forces her to accept death. And so she comes out, she's proved it, that she's a knight, because this is some magical chamber that was never explained. But as long as you pass it, basically it means you are a true knight. So her hands are bandaged because she was scraping against the wall. You cannot scream. That's the other thing. You can never scream in the chamber. So she, however, after she wakes up from her nap, because again, this happens early in the morning and they're exhausted afterwards. So when she wakes up, it's almost like a veil had been lifted, and she realizes Roger, the queen, has been sickly ever since the sleeping sickness. And she goes and breaks into his rooms, and he has images of the royal family, herself, her friends, a lot of other people, and they're kind of veiled, and the queen's being taken in and out of water, basically getting her to waste away. So she goes and she reveals this, and she challenges Roger, and he demands trial by combat, because she's, of course, made explanations. She agrees, obviously, but he demands it right now. So she goes back with Jonathan and Gary, I think, and Raoul. George shows up. Of course he does, because he's spying on everything. And eventually both Coram and Miles come in, and she reveals herself to everybody. Obviously, Jonathan and Gary and George have already known. Miles has known for years. He admits that to her, because, again, he was part of, remember, the first book. He was sitting vigil when she was healing Jonathan from the sleeping sickness, and he hears Jonathan's voice as an adult man, and Elena, who's in playing Sir Alan, as a female. So he's suspected for years, and he admits that to her. He's like, I suspected this for years. So she goes back out. Of course, Throm is in the room as well. So she battles him. He eventually slices through her corset that she wears to press down her breasts. She's revealed as female. She apologizes. Her brother explains everything. Like, here's our birth certificates. We were twins, male and female. She wanted to be a knight. I wanted to be a sorcerer. He says, like, she had the worst end of the stick because she had to lie to people she cared about for all these years. So that's revealed. Roger still attacks her. And she kills him. So that's the very end of this book. She kills Roger. And basically it's the king and queen they can't do anything about it. She's already sworn. She's passed through the ordeal. She's a knight of Tortall. They can't really do anything. They cannot rescind that, at least not in this mythology that Pierce has created. But they obviously do not like her. They do not like this at all. And she's going to go off adventuring anyway. So that's how it ends. She's going to go off adventuring and dealing with that. So Throm is there to protect Jonathan. Roger's dead. And again, Throm is still there to protect John, which is all she cares about. She's just going to go off adventuring with her cat and her man-at-arms. They're planning to go down to the desert because she's sick of being cold. Because they do the ordeal at least once a year. Normally it's at the winter solstice. So that's when they do this. So she's going to go off adventuring. And she's going to miss her friends. And obviously both Jonathan and George. And she's been sleeping with Jonathan. So that's the end of this book. It's very, very interesting. One word on how Tamora Pierce handles sex. So it's never described at all. Now, again, there's a 4-year age difference between Elena and Jonathan. Trust me, that is the smallest you'll get. The next series, which again, she literally does not have it at the very, very end of the books. Literally. There's a massive age. We'll get there. We'll get to the Immortals Quartet. But again, it's very much implied. And basically the most they'll say is they're sleeping together. And they're laying in bed naked. And that's the terminology. Let's see if I can say it specifically. Let's see. Not captured. Oh, forgot to mention that. That was, no, we went through that. This is the second shooting of this. My cat actually brushed the exit button on my filming. So, yeah. Did I mention that? In this one, there was something in the middle of this book before she obviously becomes a knight, where Roger, essentially, there's a war that goes on, and Elena's eventually captured, and Jonathan rescues her, but it's very much involving with Roger, and him causing issues. So, and Elena using a lot of her healing powder, and Jonathan having to rescue her because she drains herself. So it's kind of a very interesting thing. It's very much connected to Roger's interference and Jonathan's commitment to her, because he's not supposed to go rescue her. His father has no spine and doesn't want battles. He doesn't like fighting at all. Which of course irritates the living daylights out of Jonathan, because his father's not ruling quite as well. He's letting people have their way a lot. So you really get a little bit of understanding, a little bit more of Jonathan's father. So that happens kind of in the middle of the book. So back to the sex thing. I think I can see if I can find this, where the words she does to describe. Let's see. Where do we go here? Princess Squires. Yeah, let's see. Let's see. How does she describe this? They do talk a little bit about Delia of Inheart. She's flirting with Jonathan a lot. Again, she shows up later. She's not a good thing. Let us see. All right. I can't remember where the heck it is, but again, she doesn't describe. It's not described. It's on the eve of again Elena's birthday. It's implied, and that's pretty much to the extent that that's how Pierce deals with sex, because obviously Elena ends up having an affair with Jonathan for a portion of this book, and then it comes to a head in the next book, in The Woman Who Rides Like a Man, and then in that book she also sleeps with George. So she finally gets to sleep with George. Massive spoiler, she actually marries George eventually. She marries George Cooper. And they become engaged at the end of the last book. She also sleeps with a Shang dragon. That's, again, in the last book. So, and as of the book series, Elena's very much the only character that does a lot of sleeping around in her book series. The Protector of the Small Quartet, which I'll cover eventually. It's not on the list right now, but she covers it a little bit. And then in the Immortals Quartet, which I'm covering next, why sex again is mentioned. The main characters don't even go anywhere near that until the very, very end of the last book, partially because of the age difference. We'll talk about that when we get there. Those are actually some of my favorite books. But that is it for this review. If you like what you see, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm covering, obviously, at this point, I'm covering the Song of the Lioness Quartet, and I'm going to cover the Immortals Quartet, which actually in the span of chronologically follows this. I will eventually cover her Protector of the Small Quartet, and possibly the books with Becca, which is another quartet, this more legend prequel. So that's long before Elena is even born. Becca is an ancestor of George Cooper. So that she has that's a whole different time period. I have already covered the Circle of Magic quartets, both the Circle of Magic, Circle Opens, and the Will of the Empress. I have not covered Melting Stones or Battle Magic as of yet. I don't know those books as well. I do, in fact, own them. The other book series, and this is not something I plan to cover because I don't own them. I own all of these. These belong to me. Is the Daughter of Lioness books. There are two of them. I've read them maybe once or twice. I don't particularly like them for various reasons, but it's been a very, very long time, and again, I do not own them, so they're not on the list. As of the next book series that she's starting with Newmare, I haven't read it yet, and I don't have it, and I'm seeing where she's going with it, because she's kind of disappeared off the internet. So since she disappeared around 2019, and we don't know what's going on. So rightly after that book has come out. So if she does end up finishing it, I will probably try to read them and talk about them. But that obviously is in the distant future. So be sure to like and subscribe. Besides covering these books, I cover a variety of other series, a lot of standalone books, various reasons. I do films. I do some homeschool education stuff. By the time you guys see this, my daughter will be 3.5. She'll be 3.5. So we'll be moving more into the secular homeschooling stuff. Right now she's 2.5. So we're not there yet. So we'll get there. So those things will be added, as well as some travel stuff. So be sure to check out the channel, like and subscribe to look forward to more content. Thank you.